All right, so I've got. Oh, that is recording already. And then that's your setup on that. I can hear you.
Cool.
So these have a different sound to me. I mean, like it's if you talk into it like this, it's giving me the clarity in my headphones as if you're holding them like a SM58 like this.
Okay.
With it right here, you can tell that it's it's catching underneath, and it's a little bit more or less like strong of
Right.
but it's present enough where I'm satisfied with it. But today's the first day I put these to use with this setup, and with doing the edit on it, I'll kind of determine whether or not if there needs to be improvement, if I'll do it again. But I don't know. Holding a microphone for like 2 hours can also be kind of can kind of fucking make things a little you just get tired and your arms just relax, and like you're just saying dialogue, and it's like your lower volume, and I'm just not trying to edit stuff like volume levels of.
Yeah.
So like just trying to find, like, just like with this stuff, a system that yields consistent acceptable results, so then I can just like focus on like the ideas.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been like a little bit more in with this kind of ongoing project, like having like, when I get like certain ideas, I'll be like, oh, this is something I should talk about with so and so, and I'll write it in my phone in the notes, and then keep it in the bank for the next opportunity where it would be applicable. And so when you had asked, you got any topics, that was the most recent one I had like collected, where I was like, so with the recording that I've been doing, with like, doing, taking on different things that are sort of like, I'm not like like an elitist where like, I can only, it's only good if you do it this way. Where like when I had an iMac, I was using Logic Pro, and I just had some fancy recordings in that era, and I'm using soft synths and my little MIDI keyboard and doing stuff that like carried with me a sort of shame, because it was like I was creating stuff that I couldn't actually really create because of the ability to kind of synthesize it through the like Logic, and trying to like, oh, this is so much fun recording in MIDI or whatever. But like when that took a crap, I was so just infuriated by like how much it would cost to get a new one, a new iMac. So I was like,
I'm currently fighting that.
if I spent that money on hardware gear, that hardware gear would certainly last longer than the next iMac. I mean, this one was lasted me 7 years, and Apple, makes me feel like I'm lucky or something. It was like weird, and I'm like, to me, it was like that 7 years flew by, because it does sound like kind of like time to get a new computer. But after 7 years, the shit still worked fast and good, and it was just like it had a malfunction where I pretty well. I've diagnosed it as like the GPU. It overheated, and that's why it just had the issues that it did. And then I put it away. I didn't get rid of it, and I just kept it. Well, I just recently, this past summer, like looked up on YouTube, and there's like shitloads of videos on how to fix that. Tons of people who've taken it apart, and like basically you can like bake the shit, like take the card out and bake it, and then like you reflow like the processor, like the heat basically causes the soldering connections on these like real small pins to crack, break, lose connection, and then you start getting like your screen's all broken up, and you just can't do shit. So like, yeah, if you reflow it, getting those cards can be problematic. I mean, it's a specific thing for a computer that's over a decade old. It's like they're available, but it's all seemingly so risky. Like, oh, I'm going to spend $150 on this used GPU, and I have to install it myself, and I may not succeed, and that could be a lot of loss there. So,
Well, plus two, what year was that?
so it's 2009.
Yeah, so like you can't even use like current operating system or anything with that.
That was the other thing that irritated me. It was like, okay, so what if I do go and get a new iMac? I'm like, okay, well, then my version of Logic Pro, that software won't carry over from when I research here. It's almost like, no, they want you to get Logic Pro X now, and it's like it's like you could probably use that stuff, but it made me feel not confident about it. Like it just seemed like there might be glitches, and it's not this and that, and it's like I was like, oh fuck, great, so I can't open up any of my projects from the past either. So I'm like, that's stupid. It's one of the things I thought was so cool about this, is that you're able to just be like, click, 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 look, a project I did a year ago, where if it's all locked up on a particular operating system, I'm like, I just can't afford this. I can't afford it to do what I want to do in this way, because otherwise every so many years I'm going to have to drop thousands of dollars just to re-up what I already got essentially to get, and then I have to give this curve of new software probably every so often, and that's like that sucks too. So I kind of got like a stink about using the computer to record, went DAWless, and then years went by, accumulated a lot of stuff, learned a lot of stuff about like how to do these processes not using the computer, and that's when I was learning about like using auxiliary sends and using the subgroups and like things that were like analog. And so when I got into a project where I was doing vocals on it, I was like, this sucks doing this on a multi-track recorder. I'm doing like 20 takes and they all suck, and I'm like, if I was, I definitely wouldn't do it on a tape machine. I'd be like, I'm breaking it.
Lose your mind.
Yeah. You know, and then it's like on digital, it's like, oh, this is easy. I just go back, there's no moving parts, it's instant. But it just felt like I'd rather be using computer software, see my track, go, right there, I did it. That all sucks. Comp it, you know, and do like 10 takes and then do comps. I'm like, I do not want to do vocal comps on a multi-track recorder. I was like, so I went and got the interface, got Ableton, and I was like, this is awesome. This is amazing. This is so much better than that, doing so many different recording approaches going DAWless, you know, where you just like, yeah, you can really like, you know, I don't consider it cheating, but I definitely know that there's like a stigma too as well to like recording where, you know, it'd be like cheating to be like, I'm just going to play this guitar here and now I'm going to loop that, you know. I do that because sometimes it's like, it depends. It keeps changing, but like, you know, some stuff it's almost like, I just don't feel like waiting through the whole song just to do those couple little parts. Like, okay, now here's the chorus. So you just like stop and skip ahead. Or if it's just like a rhythm guitar, you're just going, I don't even know if it's going to work out. So I'm just copying and pasting to see if this works, and just trying to build it to flesh it out, because I really just want to like put my voice to it to see if I can do that. And then you end up just being like, yeah, I've got like loops and stuff, and it feels like it'd be like sampling a CD in the height of underground hip hop, you know. Like it feels like it's not cool, but at the same time I'm like, that doesn't bother me though. I'll do anything it takes to get to something that just sounds exciting to me, or you know, it gets my interest. It doesn't need to be it's almost like the better you get at it, you start putting more like I should be able to play this all the way through. So it's like if you're not good, you're almost going like, if I can just get one verse without messing up, and then that'll be good enough. But it's like I can already see there are certain things where it's like you get to a point where you're going like, well, when you loop it, you know, you may not be able to tell that it's a loop if it's a big enough loop, but there's something about that I really want to try to capture with these recording projects that I do, is like the natural, the realism of spontaneity. So like errors are actually something I don't really want to say like I want to try to flaunt those, but it's almost like being too fast or too slow in your meter on the drums, as long as it doesn't distract from the flow of the song, that's like what makes the drums real, you know, for me at least, and I can appreciate. I don't want shit all fluctuating, but you know, if you go on the grid with a drum machine, well then your problem is that it sounds too, you know,
sterile.
Yeah, and like on the grid. So like you start to like, you know, appreciate like you know, thinking about like, okay, like I really appreciate sort of like the inaccuracies in like the capturing process, and the problems that like, you know, aren't, you know, necessarily what you would have tried to do. You know, you get a little noise in something because you drove it too hard or whatever. And now you've got this recording where you've got this sound that you may actually end up falling in love with and like want to replicate, but like you may not have thought about that if you were just using like, you know, things that kind of set it up for you. Like I just dropped this plugin, I got this amp thing and do that. Where it's like when I do it with these amps, you run into the air of the room, and it's like just using a microphone and putting some air into a recording is really exciting to me. So getting into like the lo-fi topic, so I started thinking about like, well, I've got tape recorders, you know, and I like lo-fi music, and I could think about when it started, you know, to me when I would think like, well, it's probably always been something that existed, because there's like, you know, levels to recording, and there's professional and there's home, there's amateur, and that like, so lo-fi was almost like, well, lo-fi really wasn't like a thing, it was just like the result of what was available in technology for people who are maybe like home recording. So then like as time goes on, that becomes like a sound that you could call like lo-fi, and then it becomes like something that is like, well, I like that sound, and it's like, well, you could recreate that sound possibly because, well, if they just used this tape recorder, well, if I get a tape recorder and they use like cheap instruments, it's like, yeah, that's possible. You could pretty well cultivate like lo-fi music in your head. At least you think it'd be possible, just because it is based off of like like budget in a way. Like cheap gear or gear that's low fidelity, where like nowadays it's just so easy to get a clean recording because stuff's just set up to be, like, don't worry, we got you. You don't worry about that. You just buy our product and it's going to make you get what you want. Where like in the day it was almost like there'd be like a learning curve to even like just a little cassette recorder, you know? But that learning curve could cause you to make like decisions that yielded unique results. But like I started thinking about like, well, lo-fi in a sense is kind of like in its origins something that was not intentionally. It wasn't intentional. But now it's like it's definitely been around. This idea, this key hot word, lo-fi, has been around long enough where there are people who are like, I want to make lo-fi. I want to make this sound lo-fi. It's like I like that lo-fi sound, or my favorite version of the song is like this cover version, and it's like it sounds kind of like, what is lo-fi? And it's like you could be like, oh, maybe like to a less passionate somebody who's not as passionate about music, lo-fi might just be described as like it just sounds shittier. Where like if you're passionate about music, you could be like, oh, well, lo-fi is like, well, it's a lot of different things, but typically it has to deal with the way something's recorded, and it's done on something that's like a lower fidelity than what would be considered professional, and then you yield these results that give you noise and like compromises in the production process that actually can be inspiring and fun. And it started to be like, started thinking about the ethics then of like, once upon a time you'd be making lo-fi. You're not trying to make lo-fi. This is just what your music sounds like because that's all what you have. Where like now it's like trying to make lo-fi, like to lo-fi or not to lo-fi, or to like, should I even like what parts of what I'm doing would be considered lo-fi? Is this like a lo-fi approach? Am I trying to lo-fi? Do I want to call this lo-fi? And it's kind of like, it's just interesting because you can create lo-fi in a hi-fi way. You can go on your computer and use plugins and just like stuff that just like you just EQing, run some stuff, push some things, get a little dirt, and you could probably fool a snob's ear, in modern times. We're going like, how do you think this was recorded? You're like, oh, this sounds like some shitty tape recorder, and they had it across the room. And
there's like tape plugins that will let you do that.
And you're just going like, nowadays it's like totally easy to emulate, and it's like kind of, then you start to think, oh gosh, like, I don't know, like, do I want to be trying for that then, or am I? It's like, well, no, I don't really feel like that was ever like I like lo-fi, and it's like sometimes it's like you get that sound, you're going like, oh, that's what I like about this. It sounds like it's got warble, or it's flutter and wow, and like the noise in a record and stuff. But then to like synthesize it, like, so that Behringer mixer had digital effects in it, and one of the effects was vinylizer, and all it did was just added like
weird,
like this like hissing and then a pop, and you could tell it was cyclic. It looped, so it was like cool, but also like, but just not
clearly
cool
artificial.
And it was just like, I don't like that, and so like I started feeling like, why I don't want to like. Part of me feels like it would be like over analyzing your dreams. It like could be like maybe that's not a good thing. Like maybe they're just supposed to be random, and you shouldn't really worry too much about interpretation. I mean, it's one bucket of thought, because I feel like you could also maybe get things from your dreams, but by not, it's almost like you're creating like a feedback loop by then like analyzing something that maybe shouldn't have been analyzed. And then so with like recording, by trying to make it lo-fi, you might end up making something that just like you'll always, not always, but it's very likely you might like end up feeling that it just is phony, or you're not satisfied with it because you're trying to make it be like something that it's like you probably would just be lo-fi if you weren't trying to, because well, I'm not trying to sound like modern pop music, and it's like the things I like have certain sounds to them. It's like me just trying to make something, by the end product is going to be not matching what standards of modern production would be. So it's like it's already kind of like lo-fi because it's not so glossy, but at the same time I wouldn't really think of any of it sounding lo-fi to me. But like I just like kind of wanted to like discuss like how that would be, like if how you could like pull it off without it being inauthentic. But like like it's almost like, well, if you just record a 4-track, it would you'd get a sound from that. But then there's like other things too that you could do to influence to give you a shittier sound. And it's like, I don't know, it's like I feel like you can do it, but then there's like a threshold where you it's like too much, and it's like almost too fake, where it's just like I can't even hear anything distinctively because it's all washed over in distortion and reverb, and it's like
I think people hide behind that sometimes too.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's almost like my vocals suck, but if I do all that stuff to it, and now it sounds like something that did it in the past that we all think is cool, or we feel there's a lot of people that go, that's a really cool thing, but like that was 30 years ago, and it's like now if you do that, you're not really doing what they did, which was pioneering it in 1991, but like now you're doing it, it's like it's different.
When you go back, and this is with a lot of different stuff, but when you go back and listen to that old stuff, it's those affectations aren't usually as intense as you think. It's usually much more subtle. It's like that with like in graphic design, there's like you can get all these like packs and stuff that will replicate like print defects or like what happens when you photocopy something too much to make something look like an old flyer. Like I see a lot of flyers right now doing this. I've done it too, but where it's like trying to make it look like an old flyer. But then if you go back and look at real old ones, like they're not as dirty and fucked up as the ones people are making now. So it's like it just does. It's a weird thing. Like you tend to like overdo sometimes those like imperfections in an attempt to like. There's a Buddy Guy album from the mid 90s, maybe even later, but you can tell that whoever produced it was trying to like shoehorn him in somehow with the way the like Fat Possum stuff was kind of taken off, because those recordings on a lot of that Fat Possum stuff, it's like, I don't know, that lo-fi is not what I would call it, but it's like you can tell it's just like we threw up some microphones and recorded these guys, and this isn't really music that's like made
multi-track
for
studio
recording. Yeah, it's like, because those guys would play in like juke joints. It's dance music, so it's not like typical verse, chorus, verse stuff. So it's like it sounds rough and weird, and you can tell this studio tried to like artificially make Buddy Guy sound rough around the edges and fuzzy, and it just like does not work. It's just like it sounds really artificial and fake, but it's weird because it's like, why didn't you just like, if you want it to sound like an old blues record, it's like, why didn't you just like
simplify the process and
have the band play in a room, run it onto some tape, run the tape a little hot,
live,
get some like tube compressors going.
Yeah,
like that would make the most sense. Hang on one sec. But anyway.
Has a project like that aged in a way where it became like almost like it in the first, like when it came out, it seemed like, oh, this is like bad taste, like you're trying to sound like that, but it's not that. But then like 20 some years later, it's like, this actually isn't that bad. Or do you think things like that can change? Like it's almost like there's a possibility of like it, maybe the perception changing, because back in like the 90s, what we would call, if you heard now, lo-fi, they probably back then were like, yeah, this shit sucks, I really wish it sounded better, but I can't get studio time, it's too expensive, and it's almost like what created something that someone's trying to chase now as a sound was things that people back then didn't like, but it was like all they really like, they weren't trying to sound shitty with tapes because
no. It's funny because we brought this up, it made me like think back to some of the stuff I listened to, because I remember like I had a huge Guided by Voices kick probably about 10 years ago, and I love like the 4-track albums like B-1000, Alien Lanes. I love that stuff. But similar story, Because with them, it was like they had tried to go into some studios before that and never got results they wanted. Because they're going to like crappy local studios, and that's back when you go in there and like you're probably recording like an ADAT, not great quality to begin with, and you're dealing with an engineer that probably doesn't understand what you're going for.
Yeah.
That's what they said was their problem most of the time. So then we're like, well, we can just record it ourselves on a 4-track, and we can get it to what we want, even though it's not as like high a quality. And like before Propeller and B1000, well, there's Propeller, which sounds pretty good. That's in a studio. But the first one when they do like that, Vampire on Titus, like that's a rough listen. Like that's like
Yeah.
they didn't quite have it down yet. I like that record, but it's rough. But then they get it better. But what's funny is then when they get into a studio and they start making clean, big rock records, people shit on it.
Yeah.
And I love that stuff. I
Yeah.
don't think people like shit on it as much anymore. But like at the time,
It seemed like I didn't know when I got into Mag Earwig, but there was like, oh, this is a different sound than what a lot of people who are familiar with this band are familiar with this band by, and that like I'm coming in on it like on a different tip, you know?
Yeah,
Where I'm like Bulldog Skin. I'm like, these look like old men, but they're playing garage rock. I'm like, this is so cool because they seem to be like they're like he's wearing Chucks and he's got like that moppy gray hair and just going like, I like this. But then like when I got maybe like I don't know how many years later when I actually had my Guided by Voices like kick where I really got deep, it was just like could see the nuances of the older stuff and how that could have brought in a certain audience. And then when you start getting these studio albums, it's almost like oh, it feels like it's stripping away this like intimacy of like the way a home recording has all this lo-fi in a way is almost like this example of control and indulgence where it's like home recording gives artists the immense ability to control it, where like when you go into the studio, yeah, the engineer is kind of like working for you, but like it's almost like I can see how so many musicians would be, it's just so daunting to be recorded in that kind of environment and you're not familiar. When you're in your garage or basement with a machine that you can rewind a bunch of times, it's like, well, there's a different magic, I feel like, to what you might come out of with that,
Yeah.
I kind of thought too an example of where it kind of like is faked out, and it's like Jeans, like Jeans kind of did this thing where like there was once a time where like there was acid wash, these interesting ways of distressing a garment, but it seemed like by like the 2000s it really became like this thing of like pre-worn garments where it was like faked out where you can buy it where it's already all shredded and it's like it's faded. Shit started getting so tacky you just be like they're pulling off. It looks like they just brushed bleach on there and it just looks there's like no fade to it. It's just very gaudy looking and you're just like wow, like this is very popular and like it just like it looks so phony. It's like if that's just like the clothing that people have when they just don't want to replace their jeans or something, but it's like, but there are people buying that and it's like hundreds of dollars because it's a designer or something.
Yeah.
And it's like this sort of, it's just like the phoniness has always repelled me, where like that like pre-made aged look. And then,
I don't like it.
Instruments. So, I mean, didn't Fender like make like guitars that had that, I remember going to Hess in Manchester, and there was like the guitars. They were like they're new, and I thought they were Fender, and they were Fender prices probably, but they had like it looked like the paint was kind of worn off on the side, a little bit of rust on the hardware.
Does that.
And it's like it doesn't look authentic. It's like the uncanny valley thing where you're just going like that's not authentic wear and tear.
There's high end ones. It's like people that are known for like how well they can do
Distress
that,
those
how well they can do that. But there's really high end ones, and there's that like do that. And then here's a funny thing too. I was talking about this with another friend of mine because we were talking about like why places do that, and because he was talking to this one place about trying to buy a body. They just do bodies and necks, but they do nitro finishes, and he's like, "Can I get it without any kind of like relicking?" And they were like, I forget what it was, but it was like they have to have at least like we always call everything like at least a light relic, but that's because like the nitro they're using is like it's gonna get banged up. So it's like if you try to sell it as like clean, then like you're setting yourself up for like the person to come back and be like, hey, there's an imperfection in this, because
Oh.
it's so like, or it's funny, like the Jason Isbell Telecaster has a little bit of a light relicking on it, and he was just like, I did that so you wouldn't feel bad, knocking it around a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like that makes sense a little bit, but it's weird because like I don't like that. I don't like fake relicking on guitars that much.
I can understand that notion though, because it's like for me, if I had something that was expensive and like had a nice finish in whatever way,
Yeah.
it would kill me if I'm sitting here at the desk, I turn around, I bang a corner, and you put like the acoustic's got a couple of these like dents in it from that exact situation, and I just always remember like I would get compliments on that guitar, and I didn't know what the value of it was, but it was just given to me, and I just remember just feeling like kind of bad that I did that. But if I got it and already had those chips, and I put one or two more in, it wouldn't have been like I was proud of that, but like it wouldn't have been like sort of like bums you out a little bit when you like scratch it up. It's like a new vehicle. You're like you don't want to get a scratch on your new vehicle. You're paying payments on, but if it's a beater, you're already kind of like, oh fuck. And you're like, well, I'm not gonna spend $300 to replace that part.
Well,
It's gonna be like that.
I think part of it too with the guitars is like those poly finishes will never wear. Like that's never gonna wear off that guitar. So I think part of it was like people realizing, like you see old guitars and you're like, they look so cool, but my guitar will never be like that.
Yeah.
So like then they wanted these other ones. But like my Strat that has that poly finish has like wear and tear because I treated it like shit. So it's like it's got pieces busted off of it. But and I think it looks cool like that.
Yeah.
But that's also like I did that. That's because I've
Authentic.
had it since I was a kid. You know?
Authentic damage, and it's like
Yeah, it's a different thing.
that's I've seen like or like heard of and have been familiar for years now that like people, and I've done it in certain ways, but like sort of like putting a little fake wear and tear on your guitar and stuff, and like I've heard of like people like dragging a body behind, putting like the body on like some like a coat hanger and like dragging it so you get all these like scratches, and it's like dragging it with your vehicle or something.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of like I can see in the early stages how it's kind of fun to do that, but like now at this point I'm just like, oh man, I would just feel like, well, I would have rather spent that time actually just playing the guitar, And if I was decorating it, like I'd be like, I don't know, like unless this is actually improving the way that I can play it, I feel like aesthetics are just like just doesn't do anything for me, because it's like I'd rather just play it, and like, well, that's why I'm still playing the same Squire I got, like I don't know what year that was, like 6 or something, 2006. I'd like to get a new guitar, but if I got a new guitar, then I really wouldn't like that guitar as much, because I'd be wanting to get my money's worth out of the new guitar, and I kind of just want to be like, well, there's nothing wrong with that one. I mean, I definitely would like to see it look different, but it's like I don't want to go buy a new neck anytime soon, because that one still just works, and I'm like, until I exceed its potential, which I may never, I'm just kind of like settled with it. But yeah.
One of the things people will do when they relic the necks, when they rub the finish off, is that so that it'll be smoother.
Yeah, well, Kevin,
Like,
that
that
guitar,
makes sense.
he had that guitar, that CL, and I complimented the body finish, and because it was like a matte, it was like it looked like a candy coating. I told him like I want to eat this thing, and he was like, oh, I just took some steel wool. I'm like, I didn't even think he did that himself. I thought he bought it like that. I was like, oh man, good idea. And he said he did it to the neck too, because all that shiny stuff, it messes with it. And I was like, I totally understand what you're saying, because like
I've done that to a couple of mine.
Like glossy seems to be like it gets sticky, where like when it's got this matte finish, it's like that texture allows you to slide with like different,
feels better.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing with like you're saying, with the vocal stuff on a lo-fi recording, like when you can like have those parts where it peaks and starts to break up a little bit, sometimes that can hide like a less good performance.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's ways to use that, I think, tastefully. There's definitely stuff I've listened to or I've heard from people where it's like, you're putting this on this because it like without this like low fineness to this song doesn't hold up.
Yeah, it's kind of hobbling or something. So you put these gnarly defects on there. It's kind of like, listen how fucked up it is,
But then there's other times when it's like this song shines through all this stuff and it doesn't really matter. Like ultimately, like the music itself has to be good, I guess is what I'm getting at. It's like if the music itself is good and the song is good, it doesn't really matter that much how it's recorded. mean, the presentation, I guess, is important, but it's not often you're gonna hear like I get back to Guided by Voices is like a good example. Is like B1000 wouldn't matter if the songs weren't good.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
songs are really good, and that's like the way it's recorded sounds cool. But I think a lot of times with something like that too is that's adding to like the mythos of it because like when you hear it, especially if you're coming into it cold, it's like it creates this like mental image of like who are these people making this because they clearly made it themselves, and it's like there's got to be a story behind this.
And this isn't just some amateur like one and done thing. Like these guys are really, they really invested some time into this ongoing project in their adult lives, and they cultivated something that was like, you know, special then. It still seems like it stands special to this day. It's kind of the Guided by Voice is definitely a big example, like on the list of like examples of what lo-fi is, and yeah, like it's kind of like you know, it's kind of weird though with like Guided by Voices. For me, it was like how much I really got into them, and their sound was such a huge part of that. And I don't want to say it in past tense, like it's not still as important to me, but it's like he became. It was like even if you came into it like in the early 2000s, there's such a huge catalog there already. But by this point, from say like if from that like 2000 to now, it's like he's just like the Robert Pollard being so prolific. It almost became like I felt like I just couldn't keep up at a certain point.
I didn't.
And it was like it's like he's doing it right. It sounds right, but I'm like I haven't been, you know, I've checked out new albums every once in a while and would find a song, it'd be in the rotation, but it didn't have the same even if it wasn't so much of the production thing, but it was just like maybe he's doing a little bit of a lo-fi sound with it, but and he's pulling it off, it sounds good, but like it just didn't evoke the same like, you know, enthusiasm that like say stuff on Alien Lanes B1000 did.
I think some of that too is that the age I found that stuff was like the stuff that now isn't gonna hit me the same way because I'm not at the same place in my life as I was when I got that stuff, and it's also like I already got it, like I have that stuff,
Yeah.
and like I still appreciate stuff when I hear it. I was listening to like a podcast today about Teenage Fan Club, and they were kind of saying the same thing, and it made me think about like there's a lot of people like this where I could probably think of where it's like the new stuff isn't ever gonna hit me the same way because it's just like it's not the time
Yeah.
that I got that stuff, and it probably has a lot more to do with that than it has to do with like the material itself. But it's like, you know, maybe I don't necessarily need to have that relationship with it too. It's like if I can just find some stuff I like that's cool.
Imagine getting into Guy by Voices new, like now, where like you're like you've got all that back catalog, but then like the last like fucking 15, 20 years of like, well, they kind of they like hit something and then became a different level of things where it's like they may not be like the Rolling Stones, but they've like established enough clout where it's like they just release stuff and there's a built-in fan base that like they could press X amount of copies of like a 7-inch of something and probably it was worth their while, you know, where but yeah, it's like a different vibe though because of the timing of it. At least for me, like I can relate to that because of how long ago the deep kick was, but and how it goes for me back in the 90s with like Mag Earwig, but I didn't really get into that until like early 2000s.
Yeah, me too.
So like you know, now I'm like Guided by Voices is almost sort of like an old thing for me of like, you know, how much inspiration I got from when I was into that. I mean, it was so inspiring to hear those things because you're just like, wow, like this makes me think of so many things here, you know, songwriting techniques, approaches, like just like the idea of recording and being something that you can be comfortable with it, and it's like something that is like just as important as nailing out, you know, coming up with like a guitar riff that you want to record. The way you record it is like as much of this to me is just as important as whatever the instrument's trying to do, because like the final sound you get out of your effort, you know, it could be super raw and simple and really be effective in what you're trying to convey, and that almost seems timeless, you know.
Yeah.
You know that came off of a tape or something, right? You know, like it just like it seems like you might be able to hear an era of a format and the way it was used and how it was maybe, the only thing accessible, but it's like, it's from that era probably, but there's a timelessness to it. Like maybe like old recordings, like, that's from 19 whatever, and that because Bing Crosby, White Christmas, but yet there's just like something timeless about the way that it, it's like its own thing. And so I feel like with a lot of lo-fi has this like warmth where it's like it just kind of can, if it's done right, it can be very effective in being like, something that can stick in someone's head for their life, where like, polished recordings certainly can do the same thing, but it's like with lo-fi, if it's done right, has so much more of an intimacy, and I feel like that I want that, but also feel like it's weird to want to try to make it in a way too, like lo-fi.
I think it more commonly too sounds like people in a room making music together, whereas so much stuff that's like multi-tracked doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that we are kind of naturally drawn to that like sound in a weird visceral way. Like if you listen to old records in general that are mostly recorded that way with like live musicians in a room playing, like there's a different sound.
Microphone's over there, it's like a space thing, know,
and you can hear it's different. It's just a different thing than you listen to like a current like really well produced like metal record where it's like it just sounds like a bunch of instruments. Like, cause that's what it is. It's a bunch of instruments. It's not, none of this was like played at the same time. It's all done to a click track and it's all like perfected, and like that's what that style goes for, and that's fine. But like, it doesn't sound to me like people playing music in a room, and that's because it's not.
That's I think that vibe there is I think why I'm so like I want to record more, and while the electronic kind of stuff I've gotten into with like drum machines and this and that, I feel like these elements are just elements where like it can be really easy to create solely in all through lines and no microphones. Yeah. And so with microphones though, you get this sound that like I was talking to Kevin Pratt about it, and I just remember it really just clicked the way it came out, but I won't be able to make it that concise this again. But like just something about by using the microphone, you get a result that sounds real because it was real. It was recorded in some space. So then when you listen to that, it's like imagine listening to music and you can hear the music in a way that it was made, and it's like you like visualize in your head like musicians in a room playing together, where like it's really easy to be like, there's tons of music there that's so like not like that's like cool and interesting and and all that, but like it seems like you could like lose touch with like the analog approach of like recording air movement, with a microphone, where it's like it's a lot harder to get a good sounding drum kit. You may not get it in the first try or multiple tries, or it might just take a lot of effort and you still never be satisfied with it. But yeah, you could just go get a drum machine and you could get like a plug-in. You get like some AI shit going on.
I've done it, yeah.
Kevin Allman was telling me about like on his program, like Logic and like a drummer thing, like this like AI kind of drumming thing where you can like really like give it all these parameters and it will like just give you like there's so many options for like style and tempo and like these like things where it's like there's like they're almost like an AI drummer where there's like different ones and like the names. It's almost like this would be like, a dude to be drumming for a modern rock band. This would be like almost like a Ringo drummer, or this is like a 70s rock, and like they've got these themes that you can kind of plug in, and then you can like change the values of like how many fills, how intense the fills are, and just like so amazing.
You do that in GarageBand, and I did it on my iPad when I was making some demos during the pandemic, or maybe it was around the pandemic time. Like when I bought like the DAW I use and all that shit, and in GarageBand you can do that, and then you can go back and edit those parameters and more later. So I could use it to lay down the basic part, and then I could flesh it out. But then too, you could set it to like be going off of whatever track too.
Yeah,
which really helped. It was really cool. It was really useful.
Like it does
for,
a fill when you need it to do a fill based off of a different tracks.
But it was tricky too because like I wanted to use it to send song ideas, but also then I had to be clear to be like, I don't necessarily want you to play this. This is just to show you the song idea, but like you can do what you want, what you think is best. It gets tricky though when you're giving someone a recording though that's already got something because then that's in their head. So it's like, it's weird.
It's like I feel like that resource is awesome. I also feel like it's like sort of like it's like risky and dangerous though, because it's almost like that would take my attention, and it's like it would consume it in a way where I could spend so much time in my designing where like there's like a lack of limitation there where it's almost like you could get like really cool drums, but it seems almost overwhelming to pick out. Well, I still have to kind of make decisions there, and so almost like, well, if all that opportunity, you wouldn't just settle for a kick and snare. You know, you're going to be like doing fills and time signatures and different.
That one's real simple. There's not all. I mean, there's different parameters you can do with it, but it's all still pretty simple, and it's just a couple things you're moving around. And then when it's time to like fine tune it, it's more like, all right, let me put a division here, and this section is going to be like this, and this section will be like this, and it's like it's not as time consuming. I mean, it could be if you really wanted it to, but like it usually wouldn't take me real long to get one rolling.
I've been with my recent projects, I'll pretty well like just throw down a kick and snare, and just even recently, the recording of my kick and snare here with the way I would just do it as a track going on the computer. I then like sampled that and then made my own kick and snare, but added them to like a 2000. I now have a new folder, 2023 drums, and so now I have my kick and my snare, and I play. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like the snare in this room. I put those on there, and then I start just triggering those samples, and then I'm like, oh, this song original is like once around 120, 118, and it's like I need to be slower, so I'm going to do like 98, and I can just punch it in, and then it's like looping, and I'll record that, and I'll slice that up and loop it, and it's like all these like steps in doing something that was like, oh, I could have just easily just dragged those samples in. I've tried that too. That sounded cool, but there's just like a lot of different ways to kind of go about it. But like I've been keeping it real simple, and it's like kind of have to fight it because part of me just feels like, oh, it's just not enough. Okay, I gotta have more. But like I've noticed that if you just do kick and snare and don't do percussion, it makes that so much more of a universal thing to work with. Because once you put like, say if I just recorded the drum kit and I just like, I'm gonna do hi-hat, crash on like part changes or whatever, and you go back and you're like tweaking, like this sounds cool, but you know, you're locked in where like that's the sound of that full kit now because you got the cymbals bleeding into your drums because I'm only using one mic. But like by doing them separate or just not doing percussion at all and just putting like just like a basic kick snare beat, then like afterwards you can kind of go in and like just experiment with like you add the cymbals or percussion and or not, and it's like kind of like a more stripped down take on like the rhythm of a song. No, I'm not gonna play that right now because it's recording on video. But like in the version of like the Misfits Night of the Living Dead, it was like I kind of got some sounds there, and I was just so excited about how they sounded, and it was just like all I was using was just these basic elements, and I'm not like it's not like I'm like proficient at the drums or tuning the drums or I can change them, and I don't want to be like I don't know what I'm doing, but like I kind of just like I'm very like. I might change them, and it might be 3 years before I do anything else to them, because I'll just accept that sound, and instead of being like real like meticulous like about it, it's like it's just good enough to give me what I need. But the more I go on, it's like I've kind of like boiled it down. Like, why not to tune the drums? Yeah. I'd be interested in tuning the kick, but I'm kind of almost rather just would deaden it more than to tune the kick, because then if you've got. Well, the kick's tuned this way, and it just kind of clashing with this mix. Like, maybe if I just, like, tune the kick to this song, and you start getting this stuff where it's like, too much thinking about it. But if you deaden it, the punch is really, like, the key thing that you kind of, I feel like I want to have in the recording is, like, having the boom. Yeah. If it ain't going to work with, like, the bass, you got yourself a muddy problem there. So, it's got some treatment there. I got like a towel in there,
Yeah.
but it's like still like a little too much ring. I wouldn't mind deadening it, but because it's like now I'm getting a point where I'm like, okay, well if I compress it, you really bring that ring out.
Yeah.
So like a snare, if the snare's just got like a certain pitch to that ringing out tone, it can really stand out if you're mixing it. You'll like not unhear that, and then it'll be a problem every time you hear it, like that snare is just jumping out at me, and then you just start getting this like rabbit hole of like tweaks and changes. So it's like I kind of like want to have it be as like you know like what is it, treated as possible. Yeah, like almost it's just basically I guess they call it dead.
Yeah.
Like real dead, not too dead where it just sounds like I'm slapping a practice pad. But with the snare, like since I put that cardboard ring on there, I don't like it without it.
Yeah.
Like, I take that thing off there, I'm like, that isn't the sound I want.
Yeah.
When Kevin came and did a recording a couple weeks ago, and I kind of like he ended up doing the drums on it. I noticed I was like, wow, his hits were real strong. I was like, he hadn't played a live kit in a while.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm so used to playing this kit in a small room that like I'm like, oh, I know I'm like, oh, I'm going lightly on them because I'm like in this space I can get the sound that I want, and it's like actually I feel like I can get more out of the nuances of a lighter approach, and I got like real light sticks so that it was just like that was another thing too. Like being at Wallride all those years, there's a lot of heavy sticks around, and it seemed like the default stick that I just had a bunch of that I inherited from my stepdad were like 5As, and those aren't that heavy. They're like medium, I guess, but like they're still heavier than like these little jazz sticks I got. And the reason I thought to go lighter stick was like I got this electronic drum machine. It was like a Yamaha, and it came with like wooden drumsticks, and it had like 4 rubber pads, and it was like it wasn't too kiddie like, it seemed, but it wasn't like professional. But anyway, these little drumsticks were kind of fun to play with because they're shorter than a normal drumstick, and they're only like a pencil thickness, but they had enough weight to them where they just felt cool. And then I started playing real drums with them, and I broke them because they weren't meant for that.
Yeah.
So then I was like, I replaced them with these like I forget what they're like. I might as well just step over here and check it. Yeah, AJ5 American Jazz. These guys right here are so light, and so like for me, I'm like,
Real light.
the way I like to play is like a lot of like just like almost like ghost notes, where I'm trying to like roll a lot of times like on the snare to get like a different to kind of feel and get more of like a like the way a lot of break beats and stuff, funky drummer where you just like ghost notes can really make a simple drum beat funky,
Absolutely, yeah.
And for me, I kind of like sometimes I'm listening to a recording where I'm like doing that, I'm just going like it just sound like I'm just like lazily, it just like sometimes it just doesn't sound right though. Like, it's so crazy how hard it is to pull off something seemingly so simple.
Yeah.
And that like just the way you strum a guitar and how like someone can look like so fucking good doing it, and you're just going like, but I mean, all he's just really just doing like that, and then you're going like, oh, I forget what the dude was. I don't know what it was. It was YouTube. It was like some dude who was like real pale and white, and he was like white hairs, old man, kind of crazy jaw, almost like Keith Richards, but I can't remember his name. But he was like seemingly like a renowned guitar player, and it was like this guy's name in his style, and he was like playing, and the way he was playing it, he was playing a Telecaster, and it was like I was like, I can see why this video has this many views. It's like this guy, he has his like his I'm not familiar with this band or whatever, but he seems to have like a he's renowned, and I think he's passed away. But like it was just like when I watched it, I was like, wow, man, it really made me appreciate just like how much character you can have just the way you like could be strumming your guitar.
Yeah.
And that guy sounded. You wouldn't think there could be that much potential to sound unique, but it did. And I was just like, yeah, it's just like with drums where like those little subtle things are
They're everything.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of like even if I'm not that, I feel like I've plateaued with it, and I'm not trying too hard to get better at it. Like I'm like wanting to do more recordings where there's just like a live drum kit. Even if I might sequence it, I might add. Well, the percussion will be straight live through the whole thing, so all the issues in that sort of give it that character that sounded like I actually just played it the whole way through live or whatever. But Yeah, I don't know. Uh, Talking with Kevin about like some of the, we were talking about like new metal stuff today, and he was kind of getting like fired up about writing a book,
Really?
new metal, like about kind of like shining light on that in a way where it does it like a respect to it,
Yeah.
because it's kind of like one of those, the way he was kind of posing it was very like familiar to me, where it's like, you know, like it kind of gets like shit on a lot of times, you know, like the way like you know, you just think like Fred Durst, you think Limp Bizkit,
Yeah.
like in the way that that was, and just the sort of like how it came and went, and what it kind of has been grouped as, and what where that came from. It's like kind of like, yeah, like for me, like I'll like, so recently I've had Korn going through a good bit, listen to some Korn, and like thinking about, man, I'm gonna listen to this shit in a disc, man, you know,
Yeah, me too.
and like it was like, you know, in an era where it was almost like I was kind of like, I got a poster. I'm just going like, when's my mom going to like say something to me about this aggressive music? And like, she never saying, she didn't pay
Yeah.
attention to that shit. But I just remember being like, it felt like I was going outside my normal
Yeah.
taste with Korn. But like, it seemed like not that long. How many years went by before it almost became like, it was like you could see like that being made fun of, or that like it wasn't cool in certain other tastes and stuff, and then it just kind of aged weird, you know, where it
Yeah.
was like as those bands hit their peaks and then they were making new albums, it was like the new stuff's really like, you know, I don't really like it, you know, and there's like the older stuff where it was like not there yet, you know, and
Yeah.
so like some like Korn and stuff, like the first Korn album, uh, I think Kevin was kind of talking about like a definitive list, right? And so that first Korn album was
Yeah.
almost like that was something there, you know. It may not be like that's the end all be all of it, but that was like a point where from there you have these other examples. And I was like stoked hearing him talk about. I'm like, I'd love to consume more on that
Yeah.
topic, because it's like interesting to me, because now you don't have that same stigma to it. Like to me, I feel like now it's been around so long where it's almost like it feels like it'd be like cool to refer to liking that, because of the throwback to like, yeah, I was listening to this shit back then. It's like, can you imagine getting into Korn brand new now? I mean, like
Oof.
you never heard of Korn before, and someone plays you like Blind or something, you know, like
Yeah.
one of the big ones from the early stuff, you know, Bald Tongue or Clown, and like for me, I would just be instantly being like, "This is awesome!" And like, I forgot how heavy this was. Like, fuck yes. But like, what would be like the new modern ear to that kind of stuff? You know, would it sound dated? Would it be
I don't know.
lame, or would it be like, this is cool? You know, it'd be kind of hard to kind of, you know, because context wise, when that was new, it was like, the reason I feel like it was so effective was because of the way that it was not like what was already
Yeah.
out. You know, it blended stuff, you know. Because a lot of new metal had like, you know, the hip hop thing kind of too.
Yeah.
And like electronic. And it was like kind of like going outside of the norms for a lot of just rock music.
Well, yeah, and it was like it didn't have usually like lead guitar stuff, and it was a lot more rhythmic. I think the look of a lot of it is
Yeah.
what made it get like
Yeah.
shit upon. Like a lot of white guy dreads, a lot of
Yeah.
like bad braids.
Tracksuits and like
Yeah.
kind of like a weird like neo hip hop thing where it
Yeah.
wasn't straight up hip hop. You know these, some of these guys probably liked hip hop, but it was also like just like this white boy version of it, where it would be like kind of like, not even white boy, but just sort of like a very specific spin on something that was still alien to me. I mean, like the way those bands looked, it was still like, you know, not like, they
think
weren't
another-
just dressed like normal people. You know, they were like, had little outfits. You know.
It's a weird thing too, and it's like there's probably ways to go deeper into this, but like I think another thing with it too is that like when I look back at it and I went to like a couple Ozfests and I saw a bunch of these bands, and they always like came off as this like kind of dumb and aggro,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was like not in any way though that's really much different than like a lot of like tough guy hardcore that people love, but like there was that aspect, and I do think that affects like the way people view it sometimes, where it's like, you know, it's just some of it's like so, and some of it is a little silly.
like machismo, but like in a way where it's like kind of like
Or like
lots of gel in your hair.
remember that band Cold Chamber? Did you ever listen to that?
Cold
Where
Chamber.
it's like they had the weird.
Kevin Allman's a fan of Cold Chamber. I remember having some maybe a T-shirt, some maybe some.
There was there's some like
binder.
weird looks with that stuff and some like theatrics a little bit in the way they would present things that it just seems a little silly. There's nothing wrong with things that are silly. I mean, it's fine, and it's like it's also like it just seems very of an age and a time and a place.
Yeah.
Which is fine too. Like there's nothing, I'm not saying any of these things to shit on the stuff. But then you look at a band like, it's funny because people like that stuff is kind of like universally sort of ragged on, especially by like music intellectuals, for lack of a better word. But then like everyone loves the Deftones.
Yeah, that was thinking number 2 after like the Korn's first album was Deftones' White Pony of this list that Kevin was like had, and that like
somehow they just like skated right through.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, dude, I remember like so I got into Around the Fur, and it was like that.
That was first one I got.
And then White Pony came out, and then my brother I remember my brother really getting into it, and like he was like really into it, like like knew the lyrics, kind of like getting into it, and I like liked it, but it was almost like I didn't connect with it where I was even.
I never got that one. I never had it.
Yeah, that was so they started having like more videos on MTV getting airplay. It was like Change of the House of Flies or something.
Yeah. I had Around the Fur on tape, and I saw them in '99 at Ozfest. So it was like before White Pony, but they were like pushing that iconography because the flag behind them when they played had the White Pony on it, but the album either wasn't out yet or it had just come out. I don't remember. But and they were great. But I never got White Pony. And by that point too, 99, 2000, I was starting to get like much more into like punk rock, and I just didn't care about that stuff anymore. And I didn't come back to the Deftones until like maybe 6-7 years ago. I was like in a little bit of a kick, and I went back and revisited some of the later stuff, and like they just got better as they went. Like Diamond Eyes is really, really good. Like it's just like, but it's like there's like definitely new metal isms on those early records, and some of that continues a little bit, but not as it gets less and less, and then they get more like they just kind of sound like Hum and like things like that. Yeah, and like it's just it's just like heavy, atmospheric, melodic stuff. It's cool. I don't listen to it all the time. It's not even like an often listen for me, but it's I'll go back to Diamond Eyes fairly like regularly.
What's Diamond Eyes? Is that the name of an album or a song?
It's both. But it was an album, it probably came out 10 years ago, if not more, but like it's one of the later ones. Like a few after, it's a couple after White Pony.
I couldn't name anything after White Pony, but I mean it's not like I had a falling off with my liking of the band, but it's almost just like as my taste broadened, I just acquired more things distracting my attention, where I just would go back and be like, I kind of like, well, this was me like in this era of my life. I want to look to the future of like, I want to know about the stuff I've never heard before, or like go deeper into things I know, or like needing more attention that I should be knowing more about. And it was like so many of those bands, it's like not very, I don't know if I can think of any like new metal bands that really did that. It was like new metal came and it existed in my life for this window of time, and I wasn't diehard, but like I was openly like enjoying that. And then it just seemed to be like you start getting into like the 2000s came, and it was like so much. It was like like things like Strokes, or like just stuff that was like not lo-fi, but like it was like just like more like melodic and light. Just more light stuff was coming out that was like distracting me, taking my attention, and just getting into like, I started getting into punk music, and it was like wanting to know more, and it was really fascinating. And once you got that taste in your mouth, it's hard to, your palate's already been affected by like you've crushed Minor Threat discography X amount of times, and like the first time I remember listening to them, like all these songs sound the same. I don't even know what's going on here. It's like I just knew like Straight Edge or something, and then after listening to it a while, I was like, all these songs were different to me, And then you just get so into that where like now it's like after hearing like this character, this sound, Like I listen to that stuff and I'm going like, you know, I remember when I was listening to that and it was just like it kind of wore off. My brother was liking, you know, it was like, oh, those bands have gotten too big, you know, like Korn's videos are getting too big and like they just didn't seem the same after they were like TRL.
I got them around, like, I got the Korn stuff around the time I must have been like 12. So it's like I'm starting to. I mean, I liked aggressive music because I liked like Nirvana and stuff, but then this was like a step below like that stuff because it's. I don't think Korn was really on the radio that much yet, or maybe they were here and there, but you didn't hear it a lot.
I think Kevin said like that first album was like came like Nirvana and Korn existed for like 1 year where it would have overlapped like 94.
That's possible, but it seemed for a 12-year-old, it seemed like it was a like more below the surface thing.
Yeah.
So it was like attractive, and it was like this is something other people aren't into, and it's aggressive. But then I got the Minor Threat stuff too. Like that was that was probably the first like early American hardcore thing I heard, and that was just like such a shock to the system of like this sounds like it's not it's a lower fidelity recording for one, so it's just like I don't know how to take that. That took a little bit to like accept, and it's like even though the vocals aren't as aggressive per se, because in Korn it's a lot of like screaming and and shit, but like Ian MacKay's like yelling his head off. Like he just sounds more intense,
dude.
Even though it's like not. It is. It's a much more angry dude. You can understand what he's saying, and it was just like, it was so fast. Korn's not fast. That's the other thing too. Is like that music, new metal wasn't really fast, and so like.
So it got the head bob that you would get with hip hop to it, you know, where it's like, but it's heavy. It's like metal. It's like rock music, so it's like thick guitars, but the drums are like at a tempo where it's very. Kevin said like disco like, but it's like it does just have sort of big splashes and sort of, you know, it's spaced out more for like, you know, like rhythmic.
There was a thing too, like getting that Minor Threat discography CD and opening it up, and you're seeing the artwork and the lyrics and the pictures that are from a different time. Even though at that time it wouldn't have been that long ago, it was like 15 years before I was listening to it.
It's weird. It wasn't that old back then.
No, but it felt like it was old because of the way it sounded and the way the photography and everything looked so much different than the mid 90s and sounded so much different. Because like, if you listen to Around the Fur, if I play somebody who's never heard Around the Fur before today, they most likely wouldn't be able to go, oh, this is from 1996.
Yeah, it would be hard to peg that date if you weren't already privy to that.
Right, but if you listen to Minor Threat discography, you're like, this isn't from now. Like this is from a different time.
I could probably guess the decade and be right on that.
Yeah, but like, so I think I've had this conversation in different levels before, whether it was talking about that or talking about classic rock or whatever else, where it's like there is this weird line of demarcation where like from like mid 90s or so on, there is a sameness to kind of like the way things sound, the way things not sort of look, not really, because if you see like, if I watch a TV show from the 90s or from the early 2000s now, like it visually looks different, but like not as different as like looking at those photos in the Minor Threat book, like seeing the way they dressed and just it was clearly from a different time, and it was also like there was just like you knew there was like there's more for me to like learn about this. Like there's more to this story, whereas like there wasn't really to me more to the Korn story.
Yeah. You kind of like they're from this area of California, okay, and
I feel like I kind of got what I was gonna get from it at that point, and you know. That's not to say that like people that really loved that stuff and like stuck with it, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine, but it just like didn't speak to me on the same level. I do wonder. No, I don't think the fidelity had anything to do with it, because by then I was listening to Rancid and NoFX too, and those sound like contemporary recordings of the time, because they were in multi-million-dollar studios making that stuff. I think one of the first exposure, I thought about this when you thought about bringing up lo-fi. But one of the first exposures I had to something like that was getting into Rancid and liking that stuff, and then knowing that two of those guys were in a band called Operation Ivy before that, and it was this like mythical thing.
Mm-hmm.
But no internet then, so like I think somebody made me a tape of it. I think that was the case again, and I remember hearing that tape the first time, and it just being like, this sounds like a bunch of kids in their basement. And it's funny because you go back and listen to it now, and it's like it's not that lo-fi of a recording. It's just like just in not as nice of a studio. But at the time, it was just like, this is like, I'm listening to this like raw shit.
It's
like
authentic,
this is
man.
wow. This is like underground music, and that's an intoxicating thing I think in itself too. Just the idea that like
I feel like you've got something that's sort of special and rare.
I've got special information other people
Yeah.
don't have, and there's a status thing that plays into that too.
Yeah.
Especially when you're at
I'm
a
hip.
certain age. Yeah,
I'm hip to this.
something you don't know.
I'm already like, my ears are tuned in. I know this is the good shit. You know, it's like, and when I listen to it, it makes me feel really good. I'm like, I feel like I got like I'm ahead of it. You know, by just knowing about this, and like y'all don't know, or it's not popular, and then it's like it becomes like if things become popular, then it becomes like it's a cliche, but I've fallen victim of it so many times where you're just going like, yeah, it's not the same as when they were doing it before they got popular. Like a rapper,
Yeah.
you know, like rappers, you like them when they're kind of like up and coming, and then they get popular, and it's like it feels like I can't say it's every time, but there's certain examples in my own catalog of interest where it was just like by the time they started getting like they got like big record label kind of behind them. It was just like there was just less. It was just they had too much to play with, and they had like now their lifestyle is different, and it's like it affects what they're saying. You know.
Yeah. Well, another thing too. I mean, I'm not nearly as knowledgeable in hip hop, but like nothing in the Wu-Tang catalog connects with me like 36 Chambers and that first round of solo records.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that stuff. And that's another thing where it's like, it just sounds different than everything else. And it's just like, that sounds like a dude in his basement, like fucking putting something new together. Whereas like, I like the other stuff. You know, there's stuff off probably every record that I like, that I've heard. But it just doesn't have that thing.
Yeah, it's almost like Wu-Tang's Enter the 36 Chambers is like the equivalent of lo-fi hip hop, like the grandfather of it. Where it's like there'd probably be like examples you could go back further in history where it was like
absolutely
like homemade, it was low fidelity, it was on tape, it was hissy, and it was like
too kind of like that.
Yeah,
me.
and there was like a lot of probably hip hop in that realm, but there's something about like Wu-Tang's like sort of like the way they did it was almost like supreme. You know, like it wasn't just lo-fi because it was just low fidelity, but it was almost like, well, instead of having like a big studio thing, you've literally like just like have like guys who are taking, you know, their resources and putting them together and creating something independently that is very distinctive and unique sounding, but they're sampling, and then it's like, and they're doing it with like in ways where you're like, I don't think these guys went to school for this, so you're going like, this is like decisions made from a person who was not like classically trained on something, because it's like they're sampling a loop and pitching it down and filtering it and then like changing the pitch, and it's like orchestrating all this on like a keyboard sampler, and then like ending up with something that is, you know,
I think the parallels for that stuff with me, and I'll probably wrap on this because I should probably bounce, but the parallels for that with me are that with that they had, so there's the interesting samples, there's the fact that it's 9 guys. Some of the songs don't even have a fucking chorus. And they're also like, they're incorporating their own like lexicon of terms. Like they're creating their own mythos with that. And that's the exact same thing that is happening on the Guided by Voices stuff. And like, and on the Minor Threat stuff. Like, all those things, I think that's really what draws me into stuff like that, is I get drawn into these like worlds that these people build of like, oh, this is like, I'm into weird subcultures. The same reason it's like I like pro wrestling, or I like, you know, whatever other weird thing I delve down. So it's like, I think for me, that's a lot of the attraction to it. So it's like the lo-fi element of it doesn't necessarily have quite as much to do with it for me as it's just like, I heard that, because I heard that at the same time I heard like The Chronic and all that other stuff, and I love all that stuff too, but I didn't like dive down I got to learn so much more about this rabbit hole of that as I did with the Wu-Tang stuff, because it was just like, what is this world of like, who are these guys? And a couple of them are cousins, and like they have all this terminology they use that like that's only on their stuff, but it ties all these other things together. And it was just like, I got to learn more about this. And like Guided by Voices does that. Like there's terms they use, there's a language in there, there's like mythos to like his friends that are referenced on the records, and like places near them, and like where they grew up, and like you learn all that stuff and it makes you love it more. And then like Minor Threat has that with like, there's the whole DC community that was and you learn about all the other bands and then the label, and it's like, I think that's the stuff that really draws me in, and that's the parallel with all those things. Or like the Minutemen, like I love the Minutemen, but the Minutemen have like, they have their own language, they have their terms they use, and it's like you learn about these guys and their history together, and like where they're San Pedro and how that plays into it. It's like, it just makes you love all that. It's all these things that are like secondary to the music, but they make you love the music that much more because you have all these other things you can tie to it. It's like, if those things weren't there, I probably would still love all that stuff, but I don't think I would love it with like the same like intensity.
It's like an iceberg or something, where there's like this thing you can perceive the top, that you can get an idea like that's an iceberg, but it's like what lies underneath is like, it almost feels like when you first are getting into something, the excitement that it almost just feels like it's not, there will be an end to it, but it almost just feels like there are certain examples in my life where I got into something like Guided by Voices would be one where it just felt like man, how long will it be before I'm burnt out on this thing that just seems like there's so many choices and albums and things to like go down into, to like get in the mood for and just immerse in, and like I this could last me a long time. And the character of the story that these artists or groups have like cultivated, and then like I feel like lo-fi and like hi-fi studio productions can convey these like chapters in these sort of artists or groups and such, but I
wonder, and I think this is the case, but I never thought of it until now, but I wonder if sometimes the fidelity is what makes you seek out that story. Because like, I mean, Dr. Dre has a story too, with all that shit, but it's like that record just didn't, it does sound different than everything else, and that's a whole different conversation, but not in the way that 36 Chambers does, because 36 Chambers just sounds so much more like a DIY thing, and it makes you want to be like, what is this? Whereas like GBV does the same thing, where it's like, I love, if you gave me B1000 and like I didn't know anything else about it, and it was just, here's this record and these songs, you're never gonna learn, I'd still love it. But like, when you hear it though, and you're like, what is this? Like, why does it sound like, why is there a mistake on the first song? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, what is with these guys? And like, some of these, it just makes you want to learn more about it, and that draws you into that stuff.
It's, I think there's an element of being ephemeral for a lot of lo-fi productions, because you get the impression this was a moment captured that if it was rehashed, it may not have the same vibe. So like, it's like an appreciation for something that happened in a time and a place and created a moment, and it's like ephemeral, like a mushroom is just like comes and goes in a day or two and it's gone. And like, if you see that mushroom and that mushroom looks awesome, you're like, tomorrow it's gonna be like sort of half jellied or like starting to rot. Maybe in like 2 weeks that'll be like a pile of muck or something, And it's like very like here today, gone tomorrow. And I feel like with like very special recordings, you kind of get this feeling like you can almost vicariously live through the artist's experience of creating that, because you hear like the noises and things.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, earlier before Kevin left, we were talking about like Townes Van Zandt for a second, and it's like he's got all these records in the 70s with like other musicians and stuff on them, but like the one everyone goes back to is the live at the Old Quarter or whatever it's called. Like, it's just him and a guitar in a shitty bar in Texas. And it's just because that's just got the rawest,
best capture of emotions and those
things.
And
he's telling stories in between the songs and making jokes, and it's more just like, oh, this is what this dude was about. And those other records are cool, like they're all cool, but like that's the one that like you go to because it's like this is the most like pure presentation of these songs.
Makes me think about like how like if I would say like what would be like a favorite like Johnny Cash thing, it would be like well it'd probably be one of those like live ones. It's like actually I know that
Yeah.
Folsom is pretty cool, but San Quentin has got the like if you really listen to like the performance in that like that one's got some real live action to it.
Yeah.
You're going like this is actually probably my favorite album and this is a live album. So these are songs that exist on prior recordings, but like those maybe studio album versions don't have the same energy that you're getting on the San Quentin stuff.
That's the easiest one to convey to me. Like, here's why people care about this guy.
Yeah.
It's like that because it's like I don't think I go back to Johnny Cash stuff that much. It's been a long time since I've revisited that stuff. But that would be the one I would go back to.
Yeah.
You know,
I listened to like Folsom and San Quentin. I remember like in a period of time when I was studying, you know, and
Yeah.
like it was almost like both of these are cool, but like it seemed like in Folsom, it almost seemed like maybe like the drummer's just a little bit more uptight. Where like in San Quentin, dude, he's like you feel like you see like an octopus playing on a drum kit, and you're like he's in a prison, and they're like wilding out and going off on these instruments, and it just sounds like a lot more.
I think San Quentin
comfortable.
might have been first. Maybe not, but I think that was first. So I wonder if that was like
Oh.
they were just more intense on that one because they hadn't done it yet. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Folsom was first.
For some reason, I picture Folsom like him with a tighter hair, and then like and in San Quentin, I picture him with like more hair. And for me, like more hair would mean like older Johnny.
Yeah, I could be totally wrong. But I think that's the one I go back to. Maybe I'll listen on my way home. It's fucking Rager.
It's like it's just like a good one where I feel like you could put that on if you got the time. You could get through that whole thing and appreciate all the sort of ups and downs of like some of the speeds too.
Yeah.
Because it gets lively, but I feel like there's also some sad. There's the ballad like
Takes it down a notch.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of realized at a certain point I was like, I don't even feel like there's like a proper arc to this sort of topic, and I kind of had this experience with Kevin when I brought up like wanting to do like talk about song errors, and it was almost like you have the real facts, but it's hard to I feel like to convey the full thing to an audience without like the media to accompany it to go along with it. So it's almost like for me, I realized I was like I kind of almost feel like it was like the philosophy of that idea. It was like where I wanted to kind of stroke, and I feel like I like so that's what I kind of thought would work with the lo-fi thing. But at a certain point, I realized I was like, I almost feel like I need to have like an ending to it, so it feels like I wrapped up or made a point. But I feel like our conversation's covered so many bases where I don't feel that like it doesn't make sense why we talked about it. Like
I think there's some stuff we can probably come back to in another one.
What do you think about maybe for like the next conversation? Like I don't know if I will do homework on it, but I could at least spit for X amount of minutes about like maybe it could be taken broader. But earlier when Minor Threat came up, I thought, dude, it reminded me. I'm like, you've been the one too. I was kind of thinking like I wouldn't mind having this conversation with Mike where like. Many times here recently when I hear Ian MacKaye's voice and yell, I just go like, I don't think you can get any better than this. And it's almost like, I don't want to be like, that's the best yell in all music, but it's almost like when it comes for me and my taste, when I hear like a yell, that like, man, Ian MacKaye's yell always does it. And it's always just like, dude, like there's nothing more fun than like hearing that yell. And it's like vicariously just feeling like youthful and all this energy. And I'm like, I can't think of another example that sort of fits that. And it's like, well, that could probably even be broadened into like the sort of like with lo-fi, how you can kind of cover a lot of eras with talking about it, but like say with like screaming, and music.
Oh yeah, I can get into that.
So like there's a lot of genres that have that, and it's like there are sort of like some people can have like like sort of appreciation for one style and hate another, and it's like, or you can have somebody who's just open-minded and just like, hey, if it's good, it's good. If it sucks, it sucks. But like, some people are just not interested at all, or they just put it all into one category. But it's like Ian MacKaye makes me think about like, there's a spectrum there.
Oh yeah.
So like, and you're going like the way that Ian MacKaye does it, like if I could, like I'm vicariously belting it out through Ian MacKaye. Like, so I've been listening to, well, not recently, but like end of summer, beginning of fall, I was listening to, many times I would just pull it out, blare it real loud. It was Skewbald.
Yeah.
It's like the song where it's like Change for the Same or something. Shit. But like the first part of the song,
talking about.
yeah, like the first song was like the way he's just yelling, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it's just sorry. Oh, I'm sorry for something I did do. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. And like every time I hear it, I'm like, I'm always mocking it, and it always just gets me pumped up. And I'm just going like, there hasn't been, I don't think, another amount of energy through like screaming that like is so right sounding to me than Ian MacKay's vocals, and a lot of projects, not just one band on that one song, but like across the board, you know, even in his like later years, you know, and like Fugazi and stuff. I can't say I'm as versed on, but there's a lot of Fugazi that I like. But there's something about the scream of Ian MacKay and like the Discord, that early Discord era, that like can't beat it. But maybe that could be like a topic we could explore where, I mean, you could probably knowledge me on like a bunch of stuff that like I might know of, but
I could probably send you a couple things to pregame with, to be like, have references for like different people's ways they did stuff.
Yeah.
And like, for good or ill, because I could throw some stuff in there that's like not quite my thing too. But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Because it can be like, you know, like I feel like you can convey emotion, but it can also be so visceral that it's just hard for a lot of people to even get past that sound. So like, you know, there's also like modern music too, that like that's a main element to it, you know, where it's like, you know, a very aggressive.
It's so much more common now.
Like it's like a growl where it's almost like, I feel like that's in the same family, but it's not the same as Ian MacKay's yelling.
It's not the same.
And it's like, but Ian MacKay can't be like, I can't accept that that's like the first person who did that. Like, so how far back does it go where someone's like yelling like that, where, you know, and it's like, you know, I could probably think of some things, but it'd be kind of cool to maybe to, you know, wax on about like, finding like, you know, some, points to bring up, yeah, and if anything shared, you know, pre-gaming those points with some thought on them. But yeah, it seems like I like my mind is open, but sometimes, man, that stuff can just sound a certain way, and you're just going like, as open-minded as I can be, it can be difficult. But I appreciate it in the sense where it's like, if these were like dudes I went to school with, I'd be like, I couldn't come up with a negative criticism for it, you know? But at the same time, it's like, I don't really want to listen to this. Like, this isn't my style of music. But you can appreciate maybe sometimes just at the core level, there's just people, like, I think this is crazy just because it's like, how do you even do that? You know, like, this is wild, man. I can't imagine doing a whole show like that and not even going to the point where I'm like, I don't really like hearing it, though. But it's like, but it's very impressive, and it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I don't really like death metal that much, but that's one where it's like, I kind of understand how they do it, but like it's wild to me. It's also wild to me that people can listen to it for that long.
Yeah, and like you know, like pick up on those nuances. But I guess if you just immerse in it long enough, like I do with, I remember like Minor Threat, the discography, the way that they all just sounded the same to me, and just being like, because I got it at Record and Tape Traders, and I was like, I could return this still.
Yeah.
You know, there was always that, like, if I'm not satisfied with this purchase, I can just return it and get credit or whatever, get something else. But, like, you know, it was like that was on the chopping block for a moment where I was like, I see what this is about. If I listened to it more, and all of a sudden I was like, I think the Minutemen kind of did that too, but there was a lot more diversity in the way the songs of the Minutemen's catalog sounded, you know, than like Minor Threat. But when you realize just like how great it is when you like a sound and there's like a whole album of that, you know, or a couple different examples of it, like EPs and stuff. Oh man, it's like great to be able just to quench that thirst, you know?
Yeah.
Versus it being like, oh, it's just the one song on that one album, and I want a whole album of it. It's like Minor Threat kind of does that, you know, where you can kind of... Yeah.
And this is perfect length.
Yeah.
It's like, what, like 19 songs, 20 songs?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's over in like an hour, less than an hour. Yeah. It's fucking killer. Yeah, I can do that. I can throw you some... that makes me curious to try and find like what's the earliest example.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it could like this could like just this pursuing this kind of creation here is like, you know, inspiration to like expand my understanding with things. And it's like, you know, I'm curious, and it's like, well, if between the two of us we get some of this information and consolidate it, it's kind of, it feels like it makes what we're talking about more purposeful, because then it could be like, educational for someone who's listening to it, where they probably may not know who may have been the earliest examples doing that as well. So if you like do a little research, you could at least help interested parties get a little bit more familiarity, or be like, oh, I want to hear that, like that'd be kind of cool to hear something that's from this era that does that, and you're going like, oh, I can see that this was kind of pushing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that'd be cool. Cool.